You are Locked On Wolverines, your daily podcast on the Michigan Wolverines, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Happy Wednesday. We are back and doing it late as we've been doing it all week. Locked On Wolverines podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. I am your man on the ground as a whole publisher of Wolverines Wired Through USA, Today Sports Media Group. And yes, I am officially a homeowner. I don't get to move for another week. And then things are going to look really weird for probably about 5 months because it's going to take a while before we build out the studio. Maybe 6 or 7, to be honest, because it's not going to be as cheap as building a studio in my townhouse basement in Ann Arbor. It's a little bit different situation because you need insulation and drywall and paint and floors and heating and cooling and all that stuff in the area it's going to go in. So probably we'll figure it out. We'll figure out how that's going to work. Not a lot necessarily going on today or yesterday, even beyond what we talked about with the coordinators and all of that. I do want to discuss, to stay on this Ohio State train, because it just feels like every day there's something new with Ohio State that's just hilarious. So we're going to get into this Northwestern business fan / business owner in that area. He spoke to the Wall Street Journal because the Wall Street Journal did an article on Northwestern, their planned, which looks awesome, renovations of Ryan Field. And the Evanston residents are apparently not loving it because they don't want really anything to do with football and all this kind of stuff. Well, there's a guy who owns a hot dog stand near the stadium, and he spoke about the fan bases. I don't really know how this ties in. I think it's just people don't like the crowds right around Evanston. So this guy was his name is Mr. Starkman. I don't know his first name based off of what I'm looking at here. He owns the hot dog stand, and let's just read the quote from the Wall Street Journal. Mr. Starkman, who is 56, said complaints about fans urinating on lawns. Yes, that's where we're going. We're really hitting the bottom of the barrel here. And bushes after games are exaggerated and only happen when Northwestern hosts Ohio State. Wisconsin fans party very hard but are, quote, nice and respectful, he said. Michigan State fans are, quote, brilliant, lots of doctors and judges. Michigan supporters are, quote, ruffians, but generally well-behaved. Iowas are the friendliest in the Big Ten, and Nebraska's fans are the most likely to arrive in pickups. Quote, Ohio State fans are the only problem. They have a monster following, and they think the whole world is their bathroom. So there's a lot to digest here. Let's get with the first thing. Before we get to the Ohio State of it all, I feel like he has Michigan and Michigan State fans confused. I mean, if he wants to call Michigan fans ruffians, fine. I've not encountered that in my time as a fan, a student, a fan in the media. I have not. Ruffians is not. Listen, as a fan, I totally leaned into the stigma that Michigan fans get. I would have people over. I would make burgers. Yes. So this is when I lived in California, and I did a little bit when tailgating too, but I'm like, I tailgated before the Penn State game and the Under the Lights game in 2014. I made these burgers and I topped them with lobster. When I had people over in Los Angeles to watch Michigan games, I would top my burgers with black truffles, like legit black truffles and stuff that I would get at the store, and shave over top of them, or I'd find like a black truffle salsa. Same stores would have those. And then I would only serve champagne, no beer, only champagne. That was because I was like, hey, you want to say we're a wine and cheese crowd, we're a sushi crowd and all that kind of stuff. I'm going to lean into it. And, I'm not saying I am emblematic of the fan base. Certainly I am not. But, that was, I've seen some pretty fancy tailgates out there in Ann Arbor. I wouldn't call them ruffians. And I'm sure there are a lot of Michigan State fans that are doctors and judges, but I feel like that's more representative of Michigan than Michigan State. So I feel like they got it reversed a little bit. That's just what I'm kind of getting off that. So that's fine. Wisconsin fans partying hard but being nice and respectful. That sounds about right. Iowa being friendliest in the Big Ten. I feel like that belongs to, I think you could switch Iowa and Nebraska as well. Ohio State, though, I mean, how true is that? Like there's, I mean, I don't know about the, doing your business stuff, but they think the whole world is their blank is pretty accurate. I've been to Ohio State games in Columbus 3 times. The last time wasn't that bad, actually. I mean, not just because of the win. I think maybe the Ohio State fans were a little more scared of what could happen in it compared to the others, where it just kind of generally felt unsafe, even though I wasn't wearing anything Michigan related either time. It's like you just are waiting for them to discover, like, he's not wearing scarlet and gray, even though he's a photographer on the field. Get him. I made precautions because it was the first time. This last time was the first time I drove my own vehicle down to Columbus. I made some precautions. I'm not going to tell you what they were because obviously my car had Michigan plates. I made some precautions, took them, and was able to escape unscathed because I've heard enough stories from people about the maniacal nature of the Ohio State fans. Heck, this podcast probably, like I've done several that have touched on Ohio State in one way or another all week, and I'm not reading the comments. So if you have something that you're saying, you're commenting, and you're a Michigan fan, and you have something you like actually, have a legit question, hit me up on Twitter. Just tweet at me. That's probably the better way because I'm just not checking the comments because it goes too far, right? Like it can't just be, we're just having fun. It's a rivalry. We're just having fun. No, it's got to be personal and angry generally. So whenever I cover, once we get to the Ohio State week, I just kind of avoid reading any social media directed at me. I do make the mistake of usually going over to 11 Warriors and seeing what people say in their comment section on the annual Q&A that I do with them, and in which, I mean, I've been pretty spot on the last couple times, even except for the fact that I'm pretty sure I picked Michigan to lose both games. Otherwise, like talking about Michigan's strengths and weaknesses have been pretty spot on, and people get really upset even when you're like, yeah, I think Ohio State's going to win. They get really upset. Something wrong with that whole scenario, but it's fun seeing that it isn't just the Michigan fans getting it when it comes to Ohio State. I have more I want to say on this. Believe it or not, we're going to stretch this into two segments. So we're going to continue on here in a moment. Before we do, the tournament is heating up, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. That's because right now, FanDuel is giving new customers a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon and sign up today to claim your no-sweat first bet. Then you can wager on everything from the money line to point spreads to which team will be cutting down the net. All on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. So don't miss your shot on a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. Make every moment more with FanDuel. I'll tell you what, Zuri is really gearing up for between the couch that I got. By the way, I meant to do this as top of the show. Giant shout out to first and foremost Rocket Mortgage's Michael Coriaso. I know I've mentioned him before. Again, if you are in the market and you are looking for a mortgage, I mean, this guy is a rock star. Again, hit me up on any social media except for the YouTube comment section for this. If you're in the market and you need someone that's going to help you out, personal endorsement. Same thing with former Tennessee volunteer lineman, a former 4-star, Danny O'Brien, who was my realtor. So if you're in, I don't know what areas he necessarily services. Obviously Fenton, because that's where I am going to be living. But if you are in need of a realtor in this greater region, he is also a rock star. So hit me up if you need any of that, and I will be glad to forward their info over to you. All right. So anyway, as I was saying, I got a couch last week. I didn't have a couch. And I went to Home Goods today and bought this chair. Sarah wanted a rocking chair. She's not living with me, but just for her coming over, she wanted a rocking chair. And they had the most comfortable swivel glider at Home Goods that I've been keeping my eye on for like a month. So today, after we closed, I went and picked it up. And Zuri is very, very interested anytime we get a new piece of furniture. She acts more excited than I do. Like she's all waggy and jumping all around and all excited. And right now she's laying at my feet staring at me. So that's where we're at. All right, let's get to the Ohio State stuff again. Let's continue on. I don't remember where I left off because I decided to divert a little bit of attention elsewhere. But every year it's a week that I avoid, and it's interesting to hear that it's other fan bases that see this. Now, what I was going to say, now that I remember, the thing about Northwestern that's kind of unique is that it's somewhat centrally located in the Big Ten Conference, right? They're kind of smack dab in the middle of it all, and I mean, certainly that's going to probably mean more Nebraska and Iowa here coming up, more so Nebraska. Nebraska was like the halfway point in my drive when I moved to LA. But once UCLA and USC joined, but I digress. The thing is it's Northwestern, centrally located, probably the most tepid fan base when it comes to following the football team. Certainly they've had some success, 2 Big Ten championship games in the last, 5 years. So they've had some success, but then they've been bad again lately. But generally for the bigger programs, if they play at Northwestern, like Michigan plays at Northwestern, it's going to be more of a Michigan crowd. If Ohio State, even more so, because those fans take over every stadium in general, that's going to be more of a Ohio State crowd. I'm sure the same could be said of Penn State or Wisconsin or any of those guys. So in a weird way, I feel like this hot dog vendor's evaluation is pretty spot on, because they would have that experience. Plus, it seemed like Ohio State was playing at Northwestern like relatively frequently. Seems like they've had, I don't know if they've had a crossover. I feel like their crossover was with Nebraska, but it seemed like every other year or every few years, Ohio State would find themselves playing at Northwestern, whereas Michigan's only played at Ryan Field once since I've been covering the team, going all the way back to 2015. So I guess also the Michigan Ruffians. I don't know how often Michigan State's played at Northwestern. I guess they played every year for a little while. So the other schools, obviously, they play every year, Iowa, Nebraska, and Wisconsin that he mentioned. But it's almost like encouraging to understand that like other fan bases in the conference especially one that's as congenial generally as Northwestern is, the kind of like, please don't kill us, when you're playing them. Certainly I've had no bad interactions with any Northwestern fans in the media, but like with Ohio State fans, and the same thing can be said of Michigan State fans, is that when it comes to those game weeks, they take it so personally that like I'm sure that I'm not the only media person that they're going after. And then I'm not saying that there aren't fans in media, because there are, right? That you have some, and I worked for a team specific site, but I think one of the underrated things that I can speak of like, because I've told you before, I've kind of killed my fandom, is that I worked alongside Zach Shaw and at 24/7 Sports, and he came with this newspaper mentality, and it forced me to kind of meet him at his level. because he'd already worked at the Michigan Daily. And, he had this kind of, I'm passionate about football, but dispassionate about Michigan type mentality. And even though he also went to Michigan, but it was all just based out of professionalism. So like I told you before, like the moment when I realized I had to kill my fandom was after the spot in the 2016. There were some other things that happened in that game, and I'm not, behind the scenes for me professionally, that I'm not going to share because it involves some other professionals not covering Michigan, and it just would be unethical for me to really mention any of it. But I was a heated mess, more so about the professional stuff, but probably also off of this JT Barrett spot and all of that. And I was just a complete disaster driving us home. I was just angry the entire time. So that taught me to kind of take a step back. And in 2016, there were 4 losses in the regular season. Wisconsin, Ohio State, Penn State, and maybe it was 4 losses overall. South Carolina, I know, in the bowl game. But that kind of, it taught me to put my head down and work. And I would share all of that personal stuff because it's funny to me when the Ohio State game week comes up and I can just post like a story that's like, back a couple years ago, Aiden Hutchinson eager to prove himself against Ohio State. I know that's probably not exactly the story. And you just get, all of these fans from the rival team that feel like ripping you personally. They're just not at all congenial. Now, I do know that there are Michigan fans that act like that towards probably more the MSU writers and probably some Ohio State writers. But again, like I've talked about, there is like a rivalry almost with the Ohio State writers, I feel, and the Michigan writers, because it's, I think I mentioned this before, and I'm not trying to throw them under the bus, but you can go back and listen to it if you were so inclined. I was on a podcast in 2016 with some colleagues that covered Ohio State, and they had asked me what does Michigan's defense present going into the 2016 game? And I said, well, it's the top pass defense in the country. And they're like, you mean to tell us you think Michigan has the top rated pass defense in the country? You think that it's better than what the Buckeyes are putting out there? I'm like, well, what I'm telling you is that they are statistically ranked the best in the country. That's what I'm trying to tell you. And they got so angry, like, how dare you not bow down to the almighty Buckeye? And certainly there's some of that with the Michigan State rivalry as well. We've seen some very unprofessional things uttered by a couple different people. Again, I'm not going to mention names. I don't think that that's nice or fair, and I don't want to. But certainly there's been some things that I would deem unethical, and not just being like friendly jab when it comes to the rivalries. And, naturally that's going to draw the ire of people, especially after things like, what happened in the stadium tunnel. There were some people that had some pretty ridiculous opinions, in my opinion. Again, we're just talking opinions across the board, but there were people that I thought were so far over the line with their opinions. And I think that it made sense that they got the ire of the Michigan fan base as a result. But it's just a funny thing. All right. We're done with rivalry talk. We're going to continue on. And we'll touch a little bit on the spring game. And a thing that I think is interesting from what Sharon Moore said yesterday. I don't think we covered it, but we'll talk about that here in a moment. All right, let's just spend a couple minutes here. I don't think that I covered this. I'm going to look and make sure, because I don't want to be doubling up on stuff here. Let's see if I can pull up my little article here, just that I covered yesterday. See, this is where it's good, because I can sit here and reference exactly what I talked about yesterday and know Okay, yeah, I didn't talk about it. So I'm going to look up this Sharon Moore quote because he was asked what I've been asked often, what are you looking forward to the most when it comes to the spring game? Well, Sharon Moore told me told us, was it Sharon? Or was it, it might have been Minter. I can't remember exactly, I guess. No, it is Sharon. I was right. He was asked what's the most important thing he's looking for in the spring game. So here's what he said. You're in a game day atmosphere, especially guys that haven't played in a game day atmosphere. Younger guys or guys that haven't played, just to see how they react and how they react in the big house, who they are, how they react with fans. It's not the practice atmosphere with the coaches right there behind them. So that's the biggest thing for us. We know what Carson Barnhart is going to do. We know what Trente is going to do. We know what JJ, and he's just gotten better and better. So I'm just seeing those young guys and how they react in that atmosphere. And just let them all have fun. The big thing we're wanting to do is go out there, compete, enjoy the time, embrace the time, and have a lot of fun. So I guess that in a way is very much what I want to see, right? Like, because you want to see, I think for me, the biggest thing that I want to see on Saturday, aside from the weather not being what they're saying, I was totally fooled when I looked and I was like, oh, it's going to be 58 degrees. And turns out that's at like midnight and that's going to be like 30 degrees and super windy come the time that the actual game starts. That sounds miserable. But the thing that I want to see is players that maybe we're either hearing a bit about, the Amarian Walkers and Braden McGregors of the world, guys that we're hearing about go out there and flash. But I also want to see those guys that maybe we haven't. And I know that doesn't necessarily always translate. Nate Shanley really stood out in the 2017 spring game, as did Donovan Jeter. So sometimes you get some of that. Darius Clemens had that big touchdown. The Max Bredesen touchdown was a little bit more prescient. I mean, he didn't go out there on a scoring spree, although he had one in week 2, I believe. But he did end up playing quite a bit, over the year. So I think that's kind of what I want to see, right? Is like, who's going to be those guys that maybe like for all of the telling us that they have done when it comes to these press conferences, I want them to show us rather than just tell us, you know what I mean? Like, especially like if, CJ Stokes comes out there and busts out a couple long ones, it's going to be like, okay, all right, that might really have something here. I mean, especially considering, well, he looked pretty good in limited time last year. Or Benjamin Hall, same kind of deal. Does he get in there and just move the pile in a way that's just impressive? How does, and obviously the transfers as well. How does Ernest Hausman look? Is he flying all over the field? Remember, year 1 to year 2 jump. It's a little different because he's at a different school for year 2, but, maybe, just maybe, with Chris Partridge, well, initially George Hilo and then Chris Partridge kind of leading the charge with him, having Jesse Minter, do the lights just turn on all of a sudden for him? He's an interesting one, and I know I didn't tell you the quote that Minter said about Ernest Hausman yesterday. I'm going to add that right now, just because he's one that I'm definitely looking at. So what he had to say about Ernest Hausman, he said, Ernest is a tremendous asset, tremendous pickup, tremendous position, where I think one of the stalwarts of our defense last year is we played a lot of people, especially up front, but at linebacker, at the 2 inside backer spots, was an area where we did not rotate as much. And part of that was just depth and some injuries and some guys in and out, some younger players. And so it's a tremendous position of need to create depth. Number one, he's made plays in our stadium and in big moments. So again, remember, that's one of the things that Sharon says he's looking for. Can you go out and make big plays in the stadium? Is it too bright or not? So continue with Minter. So we kind of know that that's not going to be too big for him. And I think he's just physically, mentally a tremendous asset to that room, and he'll challenge those guys. We have 2 incumbent players that might challenge to Ernest is to go take their spot. My challenge to those guys to hold on to your spot because he's coming. So very excited about the addition of him. So he's the type of guy. It's the unknowns. The known quantities, I don't really, okay, they're not really on display here. It's really the unknowns. What guys have we heard about all offseason as being guys who are ascending? What guys do we just not know about? That makes me interested just as much in, the Keyshawn Bennetts and the Jaden Hoods of the world, right? Like, how do those guys end up doing? Because if Jaden Hood comes out flying around the field, has 7 tackles, it might be like, oh, okay, they haven't mentioned him at all, really, in the last 2 years. Maybe the lights are starting to turn on for him in a kind of bright moment. Maybe he can use this to propel himself into fall. So that's it. I think that's the most important thing. Anyway, that's going to do it for us today. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. I know I say that twice just about every ending here. But tomorrow we'll be back with the mailbag. Friday, we'll find something to talk about. Saturday will be spring game reaction. Probably all of these will probably be put up at 9 something on the podcast audio and YouTube. You just never know when those are going to go up. The internet here is awful. So sometimes I just don't even try. Like I just posted last week's Thursday mailbag. I thought I posted it this morning. I didn't hit publish until I sat down to do this because I just forgot to hit publish. So you never know when they're going to hit on YouTube. But the other channels, yeah, they'll be up here usually around 9:30 at night. So thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. We will be back on Thursday. Peace.